delectable Athbero family. I'm so happy to be here with you today on this one. I hope you had a lovely day because I did have a great day, and you are welcome once again. I'm your host on this show. My name is Mikaya, and I'm happy to be here with you today. Today, we are going to be discussing about a topic. I introduced the topic briefly yesterday. We're going to talk about hydration. What does hydration mean? Hydration simply refers to water in the dough. Hydration, water, hydra, water, right? But then we're going to talk about it in detail. We're not just talking about water in bread. We're talking about the science behind water in bread. Something interesting used to happen to me when I started baking bread. I'm calling it interesting now, but believe me, it was not interesting when it was happening. You see, I will follow a favorite recipe. That was the first recipe I shared on this class, which is the Tanjung milk bread. I love that recipe so much. In fact, it was that recipe that I started baking bread with. So one day I had this crazy idea. I used to only do it with 500 grams of flour for my family. Then I got a mixer, my very first mixer. I said, okay, now I have a mixer now. So I can just scale up the recipe, right? And I multiplied. I said, okay, instead of doing 500 grams, I want to make for my family. And maybe I will keep it for like 2-3 days. So I can just multiply it by 4. So when the recipe said I should put 1 egg, 1 times 4 is what? 4. When the recipe said 500 grams of flour, I'll put 2,000 grams of flour because everything was multiplied by 4. And I started having a very, very wet dough. And I realized that the bread I was doing times 4 was more sticky and softer than the bread I was doing with 500 grams. And I was exactly the same recipe I was following. So I was like, what was really the problem? What was the challenge? I did not know that my problem was water. My problem was hydration, from especially the egg and the milk. You see, dough does not care about the water you're adding. It only cares, it doesn't care about the source of the water. Whether it's from milk, whether it's from egg, whether it's just ordinary water you're pouring, it only cares about the water that is present inside it. So the water that should be inside the bread should be constant at every given point. If you, as the baker, does not control the amount of water you're putting, as regards the liquid ingredients that you're adding, you run into problems. So that's why I'm here today. I made the mistake. And some of you may have made the mistake, but some of you may have not yet made the mistake. I want to help you to avoid the mistakes that I made. So let's get right into it. Before we talk about how I was able to solve that problem, let me just give you a little background on why we exactly need water in bread. First of all, without water, the flour will just be flour. It will not have life inside it because water is what makes the flour come alive, right? Water is what makes everything come alive. Water is basically life, right? That is the first one. It gives life to the flour. Second, water helps in the gluten formation. Remember, we established some couple of classes ago that flour basically contains 2 proteins. Wheat flour contains 2 proteins. One is the the gliadin, and the other one is the glutamine. Now, these two flours, these 2 proteins cannot become gluten without water added into them. Gluten cannot form if glutamine and gliadin have not come in contact with water. So you need to have water inside the flour for gluten formation to be formed. That is the second one. Water helps the gluten formation, right? Now, the third thing that water helps establish is flexibility. It helps the dough to be able to be flexible, for you to be able to move the dough around. There has to be water inside it. So all of these things are what you need water in the dough for. Now, when we talk about hydration is actually a ratio. Hydration has a principle backing it. We discussed about it a bit yesterday or two classes ago. Yes, when we talked about baker's percentage. But I'm going to explain it a little bit more just as regards water today. So there's a general rule of thumb. We have the low hydration dough, we have the medium hydration dough, and we have the high hydration dough. So I need that's my okay. Low hydration contains about 50 to 60% of water. That is the entire dough. Then the medium hydration contains about 65 to 70%, 60 to 70% water or hydration. And then we have the high hydration dough, which contains about 70 to 75% of water. Now, when you're working with a low hydration dough, the water content is usually 60% as we have written on the board. Now, what kind of bread does it give you? First of all, it gives you a bread that might be easy for a beginner to knead because it's quite soft and thick. But then it comes out with a very, very dense structure. The bread is heavy, is dense, and the crumb structure at the end of the day doesn't really have a lot of holes around it. But some breads work well with this recipe, but usually a low hydration dough. The sweet spot is the medium hydration dough. The medium hydration dough has balanced water inside. It's actually also easy for beginners to work with. The crumb structure is more airy. It accommodates a lot of air, air pockets inside it, and so it's a very, very balanced dough. It's really for the balanced dough. And then we have the high hydration dough. This dough contains a lot more water, and it's usually on a advanced level. It's for advanced level breads like baguette and sourdough, as I established them a couple of classes ago. Now, this is a standard when it comes to hydration. Remember that you want to follow this principle of hydrating your dough at any given time. But the tricky part now is that hydration does not only refer to water. Hydration refers to all sources of water that enter into the bread. Now, when you're making a basic dough, it's clear cut because a basic dough basically contains four ingredients as we established a couple of classes ago. But for an enriched dough, you add milk, liquid milk, you add egg, you add butter, you add honey. Do you understand? And by the time you add all these things, they introduce water into the dough. What quantity of water do they introduce into the dough? If you do not understand the percentage of water that each of these ingredients introduce into the dough, you will run into trouble like I did. So now let me break it down to you very, very clearly. When we're talking about egg, I hope you've been able to capture all of this. Now, let us make a list of all possible ingredients that you'll be adding into bread that contain water. The first on my list is egg. And then we have milk, liquid milk, right? We have honey, butter. All these things contain a particular percentage of water inside them. Now, egg usually contains about 85% of water. Milk on its own contains about 75% of water. Honey contains 20% of water. And butter sometimes contains about 10% of water. If you do not bear these in mind, and your recipe calls for 200 grams of water, and you have scaled it up to 1000 grams, that is, you've multiplied the recipe by 5. Now you have 1000 grams of water. And you now say, let me be a sharp guy. I want to now add 5 eggs to the recipe. What you need to do at this point is establish the fact that the egg you are adding is not just egg. You are adding 85% more of water multiplied by 5. Let me break it down to you simply. Let's say you have a recipe that you want to scale up by 4. 500 grams of flour. 500 grams of flour is what the initial recipe uses. And you want to scale it up by 4. So instead of 500 grams, you multiply 500 grams by 4. And that gives you what? 2000 grams of flour. And you're going for a balanced bread dough. That should be 70% hydration, right? So 70% of 2000 grams is 1400 grams of water. So this is what your 70% hydration should look like. 1400 grams of water. If you are confused at this point, please do also watch a video I made on baker's percentage that explains all of these things in detail. So because you're going for 70%, sorry, so because you're going for 70% hydration, you have 1400 grams of water for 2000 grams of flour. Now, because you're multiplying the recipe now by 4, you will now say, since the recipe 500 grams is 1 egg, that means I should put 4 eggs. That's okay, and I'll still maintain the 1400 grams of water. Word of caution here. Yes, you can put 4 eggs, but you should also remember that it is 85% water that the egg contains. So what you should do at this point is remembering that. Don't forget that. So if you're having 4 eggs, sorry, my marker is acting up. 4 eggs, and each egg weighs about 60 grams. All you need to do is say, okay, 4 times 60 grams gives 240 grams. The total weight of the egg is 240 grams, right? Now, how much of that egg is actually water? That's where you know the percentage. You know that egg is already 85% water. So what you do, you say, okay, I want to get 85% of 240 grams, the total weight of egg. So you now say 85 divided by 100 multiplied by 240 grams. What does that give us? That gives us about 204 grams. Sorry, my marker is not clear. I hope you can see this. 204 grams. Can you see this? This is the quantity of water present in egg. So you will now subtract 204 from 1400 grams of water. Instead of adding all that egg and still adding all that water, you make a deduction. So you're going to go ahead to say, okay, 1400. Sorry, my marker is acting up. 1400 minus 204, and that gives us roughly 1116. So this is the quantity of water you should add to that bread, and not 1400 grams. If you have not been able to establish that, if you are confused at this point, please let me know, because this is a very, very important measure of your hydration. This is what you need to bear in mind. I just use egg as an example. If you want to scale up a recipe and you want to multiply milk, your liquid milk, you also have to come back to this. It's not difficult. It's just a rule of thumb. It's just a guide you need to have. Otherwise, put in your egg first. They'll tell you when it is enough, when it has been mixed enough, when the water it has is enough, especially when you're scaling up your dough. Don't just go and add the water because the recipe calls for it. You will run into trouble like I did. I suffered. You don't want to know. I saw Shege Pro Max because of all these things that I did not know. But now I know better and I can do better. I am doing better, and that's why I'm teaching you to also do better. So what is the key takeaway from today's class? That when it comes to hydration and hydrating your dough, there are certain parameters to check when you're adding liquid ingredients, because all the liquid ingredients translate into water in your dough. And that can give you the fine line between a bread that is overly soft, difficult to handle, and a bread that is dense. When your bread is dense, it means the water is too little. When your bread is sticky, it means that the water is too much. And when the bread you get always gives you inconsistent results, it means that you're not consistent with the kind of water you add. It means that your baker's percentage is flawed. Any questions? Any questions? I'm ready to take your questions. I'm ready to have comments. I'm ready to have observations. So, who can answer this question? What does hydration simply mean in baker's terms? As a baker, what does hydration mean to you? Okay, I have a commenter. Water in the dough. Exactly. So hydration simply refers to the quantity of water that is present in the dough. And that water can come from a wide variety of sources. It can come from different, it can come from egg, it can come from milk, it can come from honey, it can come from butter. Please make sure to always keep this formula in mind and have this formula at the front of your mind whenever you're adding other soft or other wet ingredients into your dough. Tomorrow, everything that we have learned in class over this week will be discussed practically. I will be baking bread by hand, discussing and practicalizing all the principles that we have discussed over the past week. And I want to be baking with you. Feel free, or please, let me say, I want you to have your baking equipment right with you as you join us in our live session tomorrow, because tomorrow's class is going to be practical. Tomorrow, we are going to show you that you can bake delicious bread with the two hands that God has given you, with your charcoal stove, or your kerosene stove, or your gas stove, and a pot. You don't need an oven. You don't need an oven to bake delicious bread. So I hope to see you in class tomorrow. Make sure you come to class and make sure you're not late. 7 p.m. is the time. I know you'll be there because I'll be there waiting for you. Have a lovely night's rest and see you tomorrow. Thank you so much. Bye.